It's funny, isn't it? How some moments just crystallize. 5 years ago, I stood at my son Ethan's wedding, watching him dance with his new wife. I was holding Hannah's hand, truly happy for the first time in what felt like forever. And in that moment, all I could think about was a forgotten wedding ring in a car cup holder. That one small detail, just sitting there, had somehow unraveled everything I thought I knew. But it also, paradoxically, set me free. My name is David, and for 26 years, I've been a locksmith. I understand how things work, how they fit together, and more importantly, how to spot when something's wrong, when something's been tampered with. It's what I do. It's been good to me, good to my family. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day that all those years of reading locks and patterns meant I could read the signs that my own marriage was about to shatter. It was a Wednesday morning in March. My wife, Sarah, had left for work at Apex Medical Supplies, same time as always, around 7:30. Kissed me goodbye, told me she'd grab groceries. Just like any other weekday for the past 8 years. But the night before, I'd left my phone in her Toyota after we'd been to her sister Jessica's place. So, around 9 that morning, I went out to grab it. And there it was, her car, sitting in the driveway. The doors unlocked. And in the cup holder, just resting there like it was the most natural thing in the world, was her wedding ring. 23 years of marriage. Sarah had never, not once, taken that ring off. She wore it in the shower, wore it cooking, even wore it when she'd painted our bedroom 5 years ago and got latex all over it. But there it was, sitting in the car like a forgotten receipt. My hand stopped. It wasn't hidden, not tucked away. Just there. Like she'd pulled it off and dropped it without a thought. Or maybe, like she'd pulled it off, meant to put it back on, and forgot. I picked it up. Felt the weight of it. That same ring I'd saved for 3 months to buy when I was 26, working 2 jobs. And I remember thinking, this object had been on her finger longer than our son, Ethan, had been alive. My brain, the locksmith part of me, started looking for the logical explanation. The simple reason that would make everything make sense again. I went inside, sat at the kitchen table, just stared at that ring for maybe 20 minutes. Maybe her hands were swollen. Maybe she was cleaning something at work. But Apex Medical Supplies didn't require her to remove jewelry. She answered phones, processed orders. And even if it did, she would have put it in her purse, not left it out in the open. I'm not the jealous type, never have been. But I know when something doesn't belong where it should be. And that ring belonged nowhere but on my wife's hand. When Sarah got home that evening, I was sitting in the living room. The ring was on the coffee table. She walked in with 2 bags of groceries, talking about the crowded store, about running into Ashley from her book club. And then she saw me. Her voice just stopped. "What's that doing here?" she asked, and I watched her face. Really watched it, like I watch someone's reaction when I tell them their lock has been picked. "You tell me," I said, keeping my voice flat. She laughed. An actual laugh. Set the groceries down. "Oh my God, David, I went to that new gym on Maplewood Avenue before work. You know, the one Ashley was telling me about. Didn't want to lose it in the locker, so I left it in the car. Completely forgot to put it back on." She walked over, picked up the ring, slid it back on her finger like the whole thing was nothing. A funny mistake. Kissed my forehead before heading to the kitchen. I sat there, my chest tight. Not because I didn't believe her exactly. But because I'd driven past Maplewood Avenue twice that week for work calls. And there was no new gym there. Just the same dry cleaner and insurance office that had been there for years. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. Helped her put away groceries. We made dinner, watched TV, went to bed. But I couldn't sleep. Lying there next to her, listening to her breathe, for the first time in 23 years, I knew my wife had lied to me. Really lied. Not just a small thing to spare feelings, but a deliberate, constructed story to cover something up. At 2 a.m, I got up, went to my office. Scrolled through my contacts until I found Robert's number. We went way back, worked installations together before I started my own business. 10 years ago, he'd become a private investigator. Mostly corporate stuff, insurance fraud. But I knew he handled domestic cases, too. I stared at his name for a long time before typing out a message asking if he had time to talk the next day. When I hit send, it felt like opening a door I'd never be able to close again. Back in bed, I lay there until morning. And I realized something profound: I might be dealing with something that couldn't be unlocked with any tool I owned. The moment you decide to verify instead of confront, you've already accepted that trust is gone. Robert called me the next morning. His voice had that careful tone people use when they know they're about to get involved in something messy. I told him about the ring, the gym that didn't exist, the gut feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. He was quiet for a long time. "Look, man," he finally said, "I've been doing this for a decade. Once you start looking, you can't unsee what you find. Are you sure you want to know?" I gripped the steering wheel, watched the traffic light turn green. "Yes," I said. "I need to know." Living with this suspicion is worse than any truth could be. We met at a coffee shop. He laid it out: he could follow her, document everything, but it would cost money, take time. Or, he said, I could handle the first part myself. A GPS tracker. Something small. He slid a little magnetic box across the table. "If she's going somewhere she shouldn't be, you'll know in a couple of days. Then you call me. I'll do the rest." I took the device. It felt impossibly light. This tiny thing that was about to either save my marriage or end it. That night, after Sarah was asleep, I attached it to the underframe of her Toyota. Downloaded the app. Watched the little blue dot appear, sitting stationary in my driveway. The next morning, that dot moved. From our house to downtown, right to the parking garage next to our office. It stayed there all day. A weird mix of relief and disappointment washed over me. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just paranoid. But then Friday came. The dot moved downtown as usual. Stayed there until 10:30, then started moving again. I was replacing locks at a dental office when I saw it. I watched that blue dot travel across town, away from her work, away from any stores or restaurants she'd normally go to, and stop. At a location Google Maps identified as the Daily Grind. A place I'd never heard her mention once in 23 years. It stayed there for an hour and 40 minutes. My hands shook so badly I had to stop working, sit in my van, just staring at that dot, willing it to move. Back to her office. Willing there to be some reasonable explanation. I finished the job, drove straight to the Daily Grind, even though the dot had already moved back downtown. I sat in the parking lot, looking at this ordinary little building with red vinyl booths, trying to understand what my wife would be doing there in the middle of a workday. The weekend was torture. I couldn't track her without it being obvious. We did normal things. Took Ethan out for his birthday dinner, even though his actual birthday wasn't for another week. The whole time, I felt like I was watching a play where I was the only one who knew the script was wrong. Monday, the dot went straight to work and stayed there. I started to think maybe Friday had been a one-time thing. Maybe she'd met a friend. Innocent. But Tuesday, the dot moved again. Same time, 10:30 in the morning, straight to the Daily Grind. This time, I was ready. I told my assistant I had a family emergency, got in my van. Drove to that diner, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I parked 3 spaces down from Sarah's Toyota and waited. At 12:15, the door opened. My wife walked out. But she wasn't alone. A man was with her. Tall, maybe 40, wearing business casual clothes. They stood by her car, talking for a minute. Then he leaned in and kissed her. Not a quick, friendly kiss. A real one. His hand on her lower back, her hand on his chest. I watched it happen through my windshield like I was watching a movie about someone else's life. They separated. She got in her car. He walked to a silver Audi parked 2 spots over. I sat there, frozen, until both of them had driven away. Then I wrote down his license plate number on a napkin from my glove box, with a pen that barely worked. I didn't go home right away. I drove around for 2 hours. Just drove. No destination. No plan. I remember passing the elementary school where Ethan used to go, thinking about all the times Sarah and I had picked him up together. How we'd been a team. How I'd trusted her with everything I had. When I finally got home, she was already there, making dinner. She smiled when I walked in, asked how my day was. Busy, I said. She told me hers had been exhausting. So much paperwork. Her boss was driving everyone crazy with new protocols. Barely had time for lunch. I nodded, helped her set the table. We ate. And I watched her lie to me with the same face she'd been showing me for 2 decades. And I realized I had no idea who this person actually was. I called Robert that night from my van in the driveway. Told him what I'd seen. I heard him sigh. All right. Send me the plate number. I'll find out who he is. We'll document everything properly. You're going to need photos, timestamps, the whole package if you want this to hold up. For the next 2 weeks, Robert followed her. The pictures started coming in. Sarah and this man, whose name turned out to be Mark, meeting at the diner, meeting at the Lakeview and off the highway. His hand always on her back. Her laughing at something he said. Robert sent me a text one Thursday afternoon that just said, Lakeview, room 237. They've been inside for 90 minutes. I sat in my office staring at that message. And I felt something inside me go completely cold and quiet. The emotional part of me, the part that wanted to scream or break something or drive to that hotel and kick down the door, just shut off. What was left was the part of me that solved problems. That looked at a broken lock and figured out exactly how to fix it or replace it. I met with an attorney named Catherine that following Monday. I brought everything. The GPS logs, the photos, the timeline Robert had built showing a pattern going back at least 6 weeks, maybe longer. Catherine spread it all out on her desk, looked at me over her glasses. Your wife has been careless, Mr. David. And you've been thorough. This is more than enough for what we need to do. She explained how divorce worked in Arizona. How assets would be divided. How we'd handle custody, even though Ethan was 19 and technically didn't need custody arrangements. But how documentation of infidelity could affect things like alimony and property settlement. I listened to her talk about my marriage like it was a business contract being dissolved. And I realized that's exactly what it had become. When I left her office 2 hours later, I knew exactly what I was going to do. It was time for the final phase of my plan. Sarah had no idea what was coming. Documentation doesn't just protect assets. It protects the person who stayed rational when emotions could have destroyed everything they'd built. I spent the next 3 days moving money. Not all of it, just enough that I'd be secure while everything got sorted out legally. Transferring funds from our joint accounts into a business account only I had access to. Spreading things out so it wouldn't look suspicious. Catherine had told me exactly what I could and couldn't do, and I stayed inside those lines. But I made sure that when I left, I wouldn't be scrambling or dependent on anyone. I started pulling my personal items out of the house. Small things Sarah wouldn't notice right away. My grandfather's watch, the few pieces of jewelry my mother had left me, documents and photos from my side of the family. I packed them in boxes and stored them in my office storage unit. Ethan was away at Northern State University, 3 hours north, finishing his sophomore year. I was grateful he wasn't home to see what was about to happen. But I knew I'd have to tell him soon. And that conversation scared me more than anything else in this entire process. On a Saturday morning in early April, I woke up at 5. Lay there next to Sarah for the last time, watching her sleep. I tried to find some feeling. Anger, or sadness, or something. But there was nothing. Just that same cold, quiet that had settled into me 2 weeks ago. I got up, showered, got dressed. Went through the house one final time, looking at 23 years of life built together. Photos on the walls from vacations and holidays. Furniture we'd picked out. Paint colors we'd argued about. It all felt like a museum of someone else's marriage. I'd already loaded my clothes and essential items into my van the night before, parked 2 streets over so she wouldn't see it empty. All that was left was the final message. I took off my wedding ring. Set it on the kitchen table next to an envelope that contained copies of everything: the photos, the GPS logs, the hotel receipts Robert had obtained, the timeline, and a single sheet of paper with Catherine's contact information. And a note that just said, "Your affair with Mark is documented. My attorney will be in touch. Don't try to contact me." I didn't write that I loved her. I didn't write that she'd broken my heart. I just stated the facts, the same way I'd write up an invoice for a lock replacement. I left the house at 6:15 that morning. Broke my SIM card in half and threw it in a gas station trash can on the way out of town. I'd already set up a new phone number and email address that only Ethan, Robert, and Catherine had. I'd arranged to stay at an extended stay hotel 40 minutes away. Far enough that I wouldn't accidentally run into anyone we knew. Close enough that I could still manage my business. The plan was simple: make myself unreachable. Let the legal process unfold through attorneys. And don't engage with any emotional manipulation or attempts to explain or justify what she'd done. Catherine had warned me that Sarah would try to contact me, try to explain, possibly even try to turn things around and make me the villain. And the best defense was complete silence. Let the evidence speak for itself. I found out later from Robert that Sarah came home around 2 that afternoon. She'd been out shopping, apparently. She found the envelope and the ring. And according to the neighbor Robert had casually spoken with, there had been screaming. The kind you could hear through walls. She tried calling me, got the disconnected number message. She drove to my office, found it locked with a note on the door saying I was handling family matters and all emergency calls were being forwarded to my assistant. She even called my brother in Texas, who I'd warned ahead of time, and who told her exactly what I'd instructed him to say, that I was safe, that I needed space, and that she should speak to my attorney. Robert told me she'd hired a private investigator of her own to try and find me. But I'd been careful. I paid for everything in cash. I didn't use social media. I didn't go anywhere near our old neighborhood or the places we used to frequent together. The legal process took 4 months. Everything handled through Catherine and Sarah's attorney. And because of the documentation we had, Sarah didn't fight the divorce terms. She couldn't. The evidence was too clear. The house got sold, and we split it. I kept the business because it was mine before we married, and I'd maintained it separately. And there was no alimony because of the infidelity clause Catherine had built into the settlement. Ethan called me 3 weeks after I'd left. That was the hardest conversation of my life. Sitting in a hotel room, explaining to my son why his parents' marriage had ended, why I disappeared without warning. "Dad, why didn't you tell me first?" he asked. I had to explain that I couldn't risk anyone knowing. Couldn't risk word getting back to his mother before I was ready to leave. I didn't trash talk Sarah. I just told him the facts, showed him some of the evidence when he asked to see it, and I let him process it in his own time. He was angry at first, angry at both of us. Me for leaving so abruptly, and her for what she'd done. But over time, he understood. And when he had to choose which parent to spend holidays with, he chose me. And that told me everything I needed to know. 2 years after the divorce was finalized, I bought a small house in Chandler, a town 30 miles from where Sarah and I had lived. Close enough to my business that the commute was manageable. Far enough that I felt like I was starting fresh. I dated a little bit. Nothing serious, mostly just reminding myself that I could still connect with another person without waiting for the betrayal. And then I met Hannah at a community woodworking class I'd taken up. She was a teacher, divorced herself about 5 years back, no kids. We started talking over coffee after class one week. And it was easy. Simple. No games or hidden agendas. We took things slow, really slow. And after about 8 months, I realized I was happy again. Actually happy. Not just content or comfortable, but genuinely enjoying my life. 5 years after I'd left that ring on the kitchen table, Ethan got engaged to a woman he'd met in grad school. They planned a small wedding in the town where Hannah and I lived, at an Oakwood estate vineyard Ethan had fallen in love with when he'd visited us the previous summer. The day of the wedding, I was standing with Hannah near the entrance, greeting guests. That's when I saw Sarah arrive with her sister. She looked older, harder somehow. Like the last 5 years hadn't been kind. Our eyes met across the courtyard. I watched her face go pale. Not because she was seeing me, I'm sure she'd expected that, but because she was seeing me with Hannah. Seeing me in a tailored suit that fit better than anything I'd owned during our marriage. Seeing me genuinely smile. Seeing that I'd built a life that worked. Ethan had told me she'd married Mark about 2 years ago, and they'd divorced within 18 months. She'd been alone since then, still living in an apartment near her sister, still working the same job she'd had when we were together. Hannah squeezed my hand and asked if I was okay. And I realized I was completely okay. Sarah's presence didn't affect me anymore. She was just another guest at my son's wedding. Someone I used to know a long time ago. During the reception, Ethan pulled me aside and thanked me. For everything. For staying calm 5 years ago. For never badmouthing his mother. For building a new life instead of wallowing in what had been lost. He told me that watching me handle everything had taught him more about strength than anything else in his life. I hugged my son. Watched him dance with his new wife. And I looked over at Hannah, laughing with some of the other guests. And I thought about that morning when I'd found the wedding ring in Sarah's car. How that one small detail had unraveled everything. But also how it had freed me from a marriage that was already dead. I just hadn't known it yet. Sometimes the strongest thing a person can do isn't fighting for something that's destroying them. It's walking away and building something better. And as I watched my son start his own marriage, surrounded by people who genuinely loved him, I knew I'd made the right choice. The real victory wasn't in what I left behind, but in proving that walking away from destruction is the first step toward building something worth keeping. If you were David, knowing what you know now, would you still have handled the situation this way, or would you have confronted Sarah directly before disappearing?